Wyoming Territory, 1879. The first shot cracked through the cottonwood trees just past the river, and Willa Barrett did not flinch. Her husband had missed again. The second would be closer. She pushed her 2 children behind the brush, her breath short and tight. Do not move. No matter what happens, stay right here. Her son Henry, just 7, clutched his sister's hand. Hazel was only 5. Their eyes were wide, but they nodded. Good children. Brave children. Willa turned and ran for the horse. The stallion bucked as she grabbed the reins and swung up onto him. She had no saddle, no rifle. Just a split lip and a broken rib from earlier that morning, and the fire of something in her chest that James could never beat out of her. She kicked the horse hard and galloped across the open field, knowing full well what it meant to draw him away from the children. Her husband, James Barrett, was drunk and furious and carrying a long-range Winchester. He had told her last night, after the whiskey turned to spit, that she was not a woman, not a wife, just what he owned. Now she was steeling herself back. The third shot hit the dirt near her horse's hooves. She leaned low, wind burning her face. The plains opened up ahead, golden and wide beneath the early sun, and she had no idea where she was going. By dusk, the horse stumbled, exhausted. Willa slid off and dropped to her knees, throat raw with dust. Somewhere behind her, James would still be tracking. He would not stop. And then she heard it, the slow grind of hooves, steady and calm. She turned, her fingers curling around a broken branch. The rider came into view through the dusk, tall in the saddle, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, rifle across his back. He stopped a few yards off, watching her carefully. You alone? His voice was low and even. Willa nodded once he dismounted. You hurt? She managed to stand. I am fine. He walked closer, slow as if not to spook her. His eyes were a warm brown, his jaw dark with unshaved stubble. He looked about 30, maybe a little older. Dusty hat, worn coat, and a quiet way of moving. I am not going to hurt you, he said. Name's Kade Merrick. She stared at him, too tired to lie. Willa Barrett. He looked at her face. Somebody did that to you, she nodded. His jaw tightened. You running from him? Yes. You got kids, she swallowed. 2. I left them hidden. You need to get back to them. I know. He studied her, then nodded once. Come on, I will help you find them. Willa blinked at him. Why? Because you are a person, he said, steady and sure, and you are safe with me. She stared at him. No one had ever said that to her before. They rode through the night back toward the wooded creek. Willa's heart pounded harder the closer they got. The children had been alone too long. She called softly, Henry. Hazel, a rustle, then 2 small figures burst from the brush. Mama, she dropped from the saddle and pulled them into her arms. Both were shaking. Kade stayed back until Henry looked up at him, clutching his mother's skirt. Willa turned. This is Mr. Merrick. He is going to help us. Kade tipped his hat. Evening, kids. Hazel peeked out from behind her mother. Are you a cowboy? Kade smiled. Something like that. They made camp in a small clearing sheltered by thick pines. Kade started a fire, handed Willa his canteen, and let the kids warm their hands. He cooked beans and hardtack and gave them the better portions. Willa watched him from across the flames. No questions, no judgment, no sharp glances like James, just quiet care. Later, as the children fell asleep, Willa pulled the blanket tighter around them. You do not owe me anything, Kade said, her head snapped up. I know how men like him think, he continued. You are not property, you are not his, and he is not going to touch you or those kids again. Willa looked at him for a long moment. Why are you being kind? Kade stirred the fire. My mother ran from a man like that once. She never made it. Willa's breath caught. I was 12, he said. Could not do a damn thing about it, but I swore I would never sit quiet again. She looked down, tears slipping silent down her cheek. He did not reach for her. He just moved his bedroll a little closer to the children, laid his rifle beside him, and said, Get some sleep. I will take first watch. The next morning, Kade led them south toward a town called Red Wells, where he said there was a widow who might give them shelter for a few nights. He had a ranch another day's ride from there, small but his own. I have work to tend, he said, but I will get you settled first. Willa rode beside him, Henry on her lap, Hazel with Kade. The girl giggled when his horse trotted through a puddle. You are good with them, Willa said, surprised. I like kids, Kade said. Always wanted a few. She glanced at him, then away. They reached Red Wells by midday. The widow Mrs. Harper welcomed Willa and the children in without question. Kade handed her a small pouch of coins when Willa was not looking. After supper, Willa stepped out onto the porch, arms folded. Kade was saddling his horse. "You are leaving." "I will be back in 2 days," he said. "You are safe here. Harper will watch over you." "Thank you." He turned to her. "You do not have to thank me, Willa." She hesitated. "You are the first man who ever saw me as more." Kade's voice was soft. "You always were. He just did not want to see it." She nodded, eyes wet. "Come back." He met her gaze. "I will." And then he rode off into the dusk. She stood there long after he was gone, hand pressed to her chest, heat blooming where fear had lived for years. For the first time in a long time, she believed she might be all right, and she believed Kade Merrick would return. The wind had shifted by the time Kade rode back into Red Wells. 2 days stretched into 3 as a summer storm slowed the rivers and mudded the trails. When he arrived, his coat was soaked through, but he rode straight to Mrs. Harper's gate without stopping in town. The widow met him at the door with an apron dusted in flour. "She's out back hanging wash," she said, stepping aside. "Children are napping." Kade nodded his thanks and walked around the house. Willa stood with her sleeves rolled, her hands red from the cold water. The line sagged with the weight of wet linens. She didn't hear him at first, not until he stopped a few paces away. She turned, and the clothespin in her mouth fell into her palm. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." She looked different. Not softer, he wouldn't call her that, but steadier. The bruises were fading, and her shoulders didn't curve inward like before. She met his eyes fully now. "I've got a place for you," he said. "North side of the river. 1-room cabin, solid roof, belonged to an old friend who passed last winter. It's empty." She wrung out a shirt. "And you'd just give it to us." "I'd offer it," he said. "You'd be the one to take it or not." Willa stepped closer, the wind tugging strands of hair loose from her braid. "You live far from there, half a mile east." "My barn's close enough to hear if someone knocks." She nodded, then looked at the sky. "I'd like to see it." They left the next morning. Mrs. Harper packed bread, boiled eggs, and a tin of lard biscuits. The children rode with Willa on a borrowed cart while Kade led them on horseback. The mud slowed them, but the sun returned, and the air smelled of wet sage and new grass. The cabin stood at the edge of a cottonwood grove, set back from the road. It had a stone chimney, a small porch, and 2 shuttered windows that hadn't been opened in months. Kade swung down and unlatched the door. "It's dry," he said. "Needs sweeping. I'll bring firewood." Inside, the air was musty but not sour. Willa opened the windows while the children ran from wall to wall, tapping the pine boards with their palms. "There's a root cellar out back," Kade said, setting down his saddlebag. "If you want, I can help plant something before the season shifts." Willa touched the rough edge of the hearth. "You built this." "Helped. My friend did most of it. He was older, lost his hearing early. Taught me how to mix clay for chinking and how to keep the roof from leaking come thaw." She looked around. "You miss him." "Some days." He didn't say more, and she didn't press. That first week passed slow. Kade came by with supplies: soap, a kettle, seed potatoes. He never lingered past sundown, and he never crossed the threshold without Willa's say-so. The children took to the cabin quickly. Hazel made a nest near the window for her dolls. Henry followed Kade one morning and helped split kindling without being asked. On the 8th day, Willa stepped onto Kade's porch with a loaf of bread she'd baked in a borrowed tin. He was oiling his saddle and looked up when she didn't call out first. "I don't like owing," she said, holding it out. "You don't," he replied, rising slowly. "But I'll take it." She handed it to him but didn't step back. "You always this careful," his brow lifted. "Careful with women." He set the loaf on the railing. "Only with ones who have been hurt." Willa looked away toward the edge of the field. "He'll come eventually, I know. You still willing to stand between us? You don't need someone to stand in front of you, Willa. You just need someone who won't walk away." She looked back at him then, long and quiet. "That's not what I'm used to. I know that too." The moment stretched, not tight, but heavy with something real. Then Hazel's voice called from the trees, and Willa turned toward it. "I'll be by tomorrow," Kade said. She nodded, then hesitated. "Bring your supper." "You shouldn't always eat alone." He watched her walk back through the grass, her braids swinging against her back. "All right," he said softly, though she was already out of earshot. That evening, he worked longer than usual. He shaved, changed his shirt, and packed a jar of beans he'd stewed with salt pork. He brought a peach too, split from a neighbor's tree. When he arrived, Willa had already set the table with 2 tin plates and a cup for each of them. The children were asleep, curled in blankets on the floor. "You didn't have to cook," he said, stepping inside for the first time. "I wanted to," Willa replied. Supper was quiet at first. She poured water from the bucket and he passed her the peach. She peeled it with a paring knife, handing him half. "Didn't know fruit could taste like that," she said, licking juice from her thumb. He watched her fingers. "You ever lived anywhere else?" She shook her head. "Born in Kansas, married at 16, came west when he got land through his brother. I never saw most of it. Just cooked and mended until I couldn't anymore." Kade leaned back in his chair. "You ever think about what you want now?" She folded her hands. "I want the children to stop flinching when someone knocks. I want to wake up without checking the door." He nodded. "And after that," she added more quietly, "I want to learn how to be something besides afraid." Kade didn't speak right away. Then he said, "Maybe you don't have to do that alone." Willa looked at him. His voice hadn't changed, but something in her steadied at the offer. "I'll walk back," he said, rising. "You can stay on the porch, if you want." "I'd like that." She brought him a blanket, then stood in the doorway for a long moment. "I think I'm starting to believe you," she said. He tipped his head. "I've got time." She closed the door softly behind her. Outside, the moon rose over the cottonwoods, and Kade lay back with his hands behind his head, listening to the quiet of a house that had once been empty and wasn't anymore. Kade stood over the fence rail just past first light, watching the mare favor her front leg. The animal had slipped on a patch of slick grass in the north field the day before, and now he was weighing whether to ride into town for the farrier or wait it out. He'd not yet made up his mind when he heard the gate creak behind him. Willa crossed the pasture with a tin pail in one hand and a folded cloth under her arm. She wore her dress tucked into her boots and moved without rush, the way someone did when they'd decided they had the right to take up space. "I boiled some willow bark," she said, offering the pail. "For her leg, my grandmother used it on our mule back in Kansas." Kade took it wordlessly, then looked at her. "You always know how to fix what's hurt," Willa shrugged. "It's just something I remembered." He set the pail down and opened the gate for her. She crouched beside the horse, careful, slow. The mare flinched only once before settling. "You ever had livestock of your own?" he asked. "No," she said. "James wouldn't let me near the pens. Said I made the animals nervous." Kade didn't answer. She tied the cloth tight around the mare's leg, then stood. "I've been thinking," she said, brushing her hands on her skirt. "About the land behind the cabin. There's a stretch that gets morning sun. I thought maybe I'd plant squash." He nodded. "That soil's dark enough. I can lend you the plow." "I don't want you to lend me things," she said. "I want to trade for them." He studied her face. "What would you offer?" "I can mend. Stitch seams so they don't split come winter. I've got needles and I know how to patch without wasting thread." Kade leaned back on his heels. "All right, you sew the lining back into my coat and I'll bring the plow down." She held out her hand. "Deal." He took it. Her grip was firm. Later that week, she came to his barn with a basket of folded cloth and spools of thread. She didn't ask permission. Just set up on an overturned crate and threaded her needle. He worked beside her, driving nails into a broken gate hinge while she hummed low under her breath. Not a tune he knew. "Something old. You hum when you work?" he asked. "Only when I'm not scared," she said without looking up. That evening, the sun hung low and gold through the slats. Kade poured water from a jug, handed her a cup. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" he asked. "I thought about it," she said. "But I don't want to run anymore," he nodded. "It's not a place that gives you much, but if you plant something, it might let it grow." She took a drink. "You ever had someone to share it with?" "No," he said, "but I've thought about it." She didn't answer right away. "Then I don't think I'd know how." He looked at her. "You'd learn." The next morning, Kade found Henry waiting near the barn. The boy held a stick like a rifle and stood guard near the door. "You need something?" Kade asked. Henry shook his head. "Mama said you'd show me how to check fence lines." Kade squinted at him. "She say that or you ask?" I asked. Kade tossed him a length of rope. "Tie this to your belt. You lose it, we walk back." They rode out together, quiet for the first half mile. Henry didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. Just watched. You protect your sister, Kade asked him. Always, Henry said. Kade nodded. Good. By the time they got back, Willa was digging near the edge of the field with her sleeves rolled and sweat on her brow. She looked up as they rode in, and Kade saw her eyes check Henry first before anything else. He did fine, Kade said. Quiet, knows how to listen. She brushed hair from her forehead. That's more than most grown men. That night she brought supper to the porch again. Baked cornmeal and wild onion. She didn't stay long, just left the plate and said, I'm not used to anyone watching out for me. Kade stood in the doorway. I'm not watching, I'm just here, she turned. That's the part I'm not used to. The days stretched into weeks. The squash came up in neat rows, and the children stopped jumping when the wind knocked the shutters. Willa learned the weight of an axe and the rhythm of turning soil. Kade brought her nails and fence wire, and she brought him bread that didn't fall apart when sliced. One evening, as the light began to thin, she walked the half-mile to his house with a folded paper in her hand. I found this behind the hearth, she said. It's a land deed, belonged to the man who lived there before. Kade took it, unfolded it carefully. This matches the parcel. I want to put my name on it, she said. Not his, mine. He looked at her. She didn't flinch. I'll ride into the county office with you, he said. You'll need someone to witness the transfer. She nodded. I want my children to know the land is ours. That no one can take it. He handed the paper back. Then that's what we'll do. As she turned to go, he stopped her with a word. Willa, she turned. You said you're not used to anyone staying. I did. Well, he said, I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped close and kissed his cheek. I know. Then she walked into the dusk, and Kade stood there with his hand still holding the air where hers had been. The morning Willa signed her name to the deed. The sky was overcast, thick with the promise of rain, though it hadn't broken yet. She wore her best dress, the one with the mended cuff and blue stitching at the collar, and braided her hair tighter than usual. Kade hitched the wagon early, letting the horses move slow along the muddy road toward the county office in Sheridan. Neither of them spoke much as the town came into view. Willa kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed ahead. The closer they drew, the more her jaw set, not from fear, but determination. Inside the office, the clerk was a small man with a crooked part and ink-stained knuckles. He looked between them as he slid the papers across the desk. You're the widow Barrett, he asked without lifting his eyes. She didn't flinch. I am. Kade stood to her left, silent but present. When Willa picked up the pen, her hand didn't shake. She signed clean and straight, pressing the tip with quiet finality. The clerk nodded once and stamped the page. It's yours now, full rights. Outside, the clouds had begun to break. A shaft of sunlight cut through, lighting the dust in the street like smoke. Willa stepped off the porch of the building and exhaled slowly. I didn't think it'd feel different, she said. Does it? Kade asked. She looked down at her hands. It does. They didn't rush the drive back. The road wound through gullies and cottonwood stands, and Kade let the horses walk the slope easy. Willa leaned against the side rail, her eyes on the fields greening from the last storm. I never told you, she said, but James wasn't the first to treat me like a possession. My father picked my husband, said I'd be taken care of. That it was a good match because James had land and a name. Kade didn't look over, just kept his gaze ahead. I believed them, she said. I didn't know there was another kind of man. You know now, Kade said. They reached the cabin just before dusk. Hazel was chasing a hen through the yard, and Henry was bent over a bucket, scrubbing potatoes. When they saw the wagon, both ran to meet it. Willa climbed down and knelt to gather them in. Kade walked the horses to the post, listening to the quiet sounds of home settle around him. That night, Willa came to his porch without a basket or excuse. She just stood at the edge, her arms folded against the cooling air. You ever think about marrying? She asked. Kade blinked. Not since I was young, not until lately. She stepped closer. I've been thinking what it'd mean to raise my children with someone who listens. He didn't move. It'd mean never leaving them wondering if they're safe. My boy's been sleeping through the night, she said. Hazel smiles without being asked. That's because of you. She looked down. It's because of all of this. Kade stepped forward, just enough that she could feel the heat of him in the chill. You want to build a life with me, Willa. I'll build it with both hands. She reached for his hand. I don't want to be a guest on this land. I want to be wife to a man who sees me. I see you, he said. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She leaned in and kissed him, slow and sure, and he kissed her back the same way. When she pulled away, her voice was steady. Then let's start. They married 3 weeks later under the cottonwoods, with Mrs. Harper standing beside Willa and the children holding wildflowers in their fists. Kade wore a clean shirt and Henry's small hand in his. There were no grand speeches. Just vows spoken plain and true, and a meal shared under the open sky. That night, after the fire had burned low and the children were asleep in the loft of the cabin, Willa turned toward Kade in the quiet. You still think I'll learn how to stop being afraid? You already have, he said, brushing her hair back from her forehead. She tucked herself against his chest, the rhythm of his heart steady beneath her ear. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, and inside, no one would ever call her anything but hers again. The first frost came early that year, leaving a silver sheen on the pumpkins behind the cabin and drawing a thin white edge along the tops of the fence posts. Willa pulled the wool shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped outside, the grass crunching faintly under her boots. From the barn, she could hear Henry's voice rising clear, calling to the cow that had gone stubborn again. Kade was already at the woodpile, splitting logs with a steady swing. The back of his shirt was damp where it clung to his shoulders, and his breath misted in front of him. Willa watched him a moment before crossing the yard. You'll wear your shoulders out before winter even sets in, she said as she reached him. He glanced at her, his axe paused mid-air. Then I'll wear them out warm, she smiled, pulling her braid over her shoulder. We could store more under the cabin. That crawl space is still half empty. Kade lowered the axe. I was thinking the same. I'll show Henry how to stack it so it doesn't shift. He's ready for more than chores, she said. He's been asking about helping with the accounts. Kade wiped his hands on his trousers. He got your numbers mind. Willa tilted her head, and your quiet steadiness. He looked down, a slow pull at the corner of his mouth. You think I'm steady, I know it, she said. You don't speak just to fill air. That afternoon, she brought out the ledger and let Henry sit at the table while Hazel peeled potatoes with a butter knife. Kade stayed nearby, mending a loose hinge on the cupboard door, his presence grounding the space without crowding it. The house had grown into itself, no longer a borrowed shelter, but a place shaped by their hands and rhythms. Later, when the children were asleep, Willa stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea steeped in dried mint. Kade joined her on the porch without needing to be called. The night was quiet, wind gentle through the cottonwoods. She passed him a mug. I got a letter today from James's brother. Kade's jaw didn't tighten, but his fingers curled around the mug. He says James died in a mining collapse in Colorado. Buried 2 days before the letter was sent. Kade looked at her then. Willa sipped her tea. I didn't feel what I thought I would. No weight lifting, no flood of relief, just quiet. You don't owe him any grief, Kade said. I know, it's not grief. Just the end of something. He reached across the space between them, resting his hand over hers. You're free now, Willa, in every way. She looked down at their joined hands. Would you believe me if I said I'd already felt free before the letter came? I'd believe you, he said. Because I watched you become yourself right in front of me. She leaned into him then, her head against his shoulder. Do you miss anything from before? She asked. No, he said. There's nothing I'd trade for this. Not the quiet nights, not Hazel's drawings on the wall. Not you beside me. Winter settled in slow. Henry and Kade sealed the windows with strips of wool, and Willa made candles from the tallow stored in the back shed. Hazel sang to herself as she arranged pine cones on the hearth, calling them her winter garden. On the first night the snow reached the top of the porch steps, Willa baked a pie with the last of the dried apples, and Kade carved a small wooden horse for Henry's birthday. They sat together by the fire, the children dozing against the rug, and Willa looked across at Kade. I used to think peace was just the absence of fear, she said. And now I think it's this, knowing I'm seen, knowing I'm safe, and not just me, my children too. That they'll grow up with laughter instead of silence. He reached for her hand. They'll grow up knowing what love looks like, she nodded, her eyes soft. And if we have more, his brow lifted. You want more? I didn't know I did, she said, but I've started dreaming again. That's how I know I'm healed. I wake up thinking about names, about rocking chairs and lullabies. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the way he always did, like he was never in a hurry, like he meant to stay forever. Spring came with the thaw, pushing green through the earth. Willa planted in neat rows, Hazel trailing her with a basket of seeds. Henry built a bird box from scrap wood, hammering each nail with care. Willa's belly began to swell by midsummer, and Kade took on more of the heavy lifting without a word. They didn't speak about the baby much, not in grand ways but in small gestures. A cradle sanded smooth. An extra blanket folded at the end of the bed. One night, as they watched the fireflies gather near the trees, Willa leaned back against Kade's chest. I used to think love had to be earned. His arms tightened around her. You never had to earn mine. I know that now. When the baby came a boy with dark hair and Willa's steady gaze, they named him Illy, after Kade's grandfather. Hazel held him first, whispering secrets to him like he'd always been part of her world. That winter, the cabin glowed with warmth, laughter rising soft through the beams. The wind howled outside, but inside was still. Willa sat near the hearth, nursing Illy, while Kade read aloud from an old book by lantern light. Henry built a set of shelves with Kade's guidance, and Hazel stitched a small quilt for her new brother's cradle. Willa looked around at the life they had built, solid, quiet, full of the kind of love that never needed to be explained out loud. She reached for Kade's hand as he closed the book, and he turned to her with that same steady look that had never once wavered. They had weathered storms, not just the kind that came through the sky, but the deeper ones that left their mark on the soul. And now they stood on the other side of it, together, at peace, whole home.